In 1962, when To Kill a Mockingbird catapulted Gregory Peck to the height of fame, he was seen as the very embodiment of virtue amid Hollywood's temptations. With his calm demeanor and warm eyes, Peck appeared to be the model of integrity. Yet behind that serene exterior, he harbored a deep obsession, an intense hatred for the chaos and hypocrisy of the film industry. On set, Peck often encountered situations that tested his patience to the limit. There was once an actor who arrived with a suitcase full of alcohol and 3 snakes, leaving Peck exasperated enough to exclaim, "I can't work in a circus like this." Another actor even brought a real gun to test the realism of a scene, and a stray bullet nearly caused the assistant director to lose his hearing. Peck became so furious that he stormed off set, shouting, "I signed a contract to make movies, not to fight in a war." But who were the stars that pushed him to such anger? And what exactly did they do to make Gregory Peck, the calm and disciplined gentleman, lose control? It all began with Marlon Brando, Hollywood's infamous heretic, along with his suitcase of liquor and 3 snakes. The film The Missouri Breaks nearly fell apart because of him. Before signing the contract, Peck had been assured by the producers that Brando had changed, that he was now calmer and more professional. But when the crew arrived in Montana, Peck realized he had been bitterly deceived. Brando showed up with a suitcase full of liquor, 3 pet snakes, and a toy piano he called his emotional energy transfer tool. Every morning, he would sit alone in a corner, play a few notes, and mutter to himself, "Today I'm going to act in the color blue." Peck, a man who valued discipline and precision above all, found himself unraveling amid the chaos. In frustration, he asked, "What the hell is he doing?" A crew member replied, "We're not sure. It's some new way to connect emotionally." The contrast between the 2 stars could not have been starker. Peck arrived on set promptly at 7 a.m., meticulously reviewing every page of the script to prepare for the big scene, while Brando would stroll in leisurely at 11:30 a.m. This clash of worlds, between discipline and chaos, order and instinct, ignited a silent but fierce tension that pushed Gregory Peck, Hollywood's so-called saint, to confront the very limits of his composure. Marlon Brando walked onto the set wearing a wool beanie pulled low over his head, cradling a live pigeon in his hands. In front of the entire crew, he boldly declared, "It will act with me today. I want the audience to feel the friendship between man and a free spirit." The whole set fell silent, stunned by his arrogance. When the scene began, Brando didn't deliver a single line correctly. Instead, he released the pigeon into the air, his gaze distant and dreamy, completely ignoring Gregory Peck, who stood frozen, clutching his useless script. Peck felt deeply humiliated. A few days later, Brando began whispering his lines so softly that the microphone couldn't pick them up. Watching the chaos unfold, Gregory Peck finally reached his breaking point. Turning to director Arthur Penn, his voice trembled as he said, "I need to see a psychiatrist." Arthur Penn immediately pulled Brando aside, barely restraining his frustration. "Marlon, this is a movie, not an exorcism. Gregory can't keep up with your kind of acting." Brando just laughed, lit a cigarette, and replied softly, just loud enough for Peck to hear, "Then let him try to feel it." That evening, the 2 men sat at opposite ends of the hotel bar. Only a few tables separated them, yet it felt like an unbridgeable distance. Brando laughed loudly with his friends, his wine spilling over the glass, while Peck sat motionless, eyes cold and fixed on his whiskey. Neither spoke a word, but the silence between them was heavier than hatred. Years later, when asked about Gregory Peck, Brando simply smirked and said, "Greg is like a statue of victory, handsome, cold, and soulless." And when Brando passed away, a reporter asked Peck if he felt any regret. The question hung in the air unanswered because perhaps the answer was already there in the quiet, unshaken gaze of the man Hollywood once called its moral compass. Gregory Peck paused for a moment, then answered quickly, "No, he deserved it." Marlon Brando was gone, but the storm he left behind was far from over. Peck thought he would never again have to face such chaos on a film set until he met the next one, Frank Sinatra, the reckless star who drove Gregory Peck to madness. The 2 nearly came to blows during the filming of Captain Newman. M.D. Peck was a man of discipline, the kind of actor who arrived on set at 6 in the morning fully prepared. Sinatra was the exact opposite. He often showed up after lunch, sometimes still reeking of alcohol, keeping the entire crew waiting until nearly 11:30 a.m. Yet no one, neither director David Miller nor any member of the lighting or sound teams, dared to criticize him. At that time, Sinatra was untouchable. An Oscar-winning actor, a global icon, and one of the most celebrated voices in the world. His lack of professionalism infuriated Peck, so when Sinatra sauntered in late and indifferent, Peck quietly told the director, "If he's not sober, I'm quitting this film." Director Miller, knowing exactly how dangerous it was to cross Sinatra, could only plead, "Greg, this is Sinatra. Don't push him. You don't want to die over this." For Sinatra, acting was nothing more than a side hobby, a break from his glamorous life as a performer. During one intense scene, while Peck was completely absorbed in his role, Sinatra deliberately disrupted the mood by whistling and spitting on the floor. Peck stopped cold, staring directly at him. Sinatra only smirked, "Sorry, St. Gregory." When a young assistant innocently remarked that Peck really looked like a priest, Sinatra burst out laughing, raised his glass, and sneered, "A priest? No, he's St. Gregory, the most boring saint in Hollywood." The real explosion came during their final scene together. Sinatra arrived 3 hours late, reeking of whiskey. When the director urged him to focus, he barked, "I don't need this. I've sung at Caesar's Palace. I know what emotion is." Peck calmly picked up the script, set it down in front of him, and said quietly, "This isn't a nightclub, Frank. We're making a movie." Sinatra glared at him, his lips curling into a grin before snapping back, "Then go make the movie yourself." And just like that, the set fell silent. Two legends standing on opposite ends of professionalism and pride, locked in a moment that would be remembered as one of the most tense encounters in Hollywood history. Although Gregory Peck finished his role in Captain Newman, MD, he never once looked in Frank Sinatra's direction during their shared scenes. Even after the film's release, Peck refused to attend any press conferences where Sinatra was present. Ironically, that very tension between them created an undeniable energy on screen. As one critic wrote, "Peck brings control, Sinatra brings chaos, and together they create a stunning dynamic." Later, when asked about his experience filming Captain Newman, MD, Peck replied coldly, "Frank was talented, but absolutely unbearable." In his final interview on the subject, when a reporter asked whether he would ever work with Sinatra again, Peck smiled faintly and said, "I'd rather act with an empty chair. At least it won't spit in people's faces." But Frank Sinatra was only the beginning. A few years later, Gregory Peck would face another man, one he would later describe as the most terrible experience of my life. That man was Richard Burton. For Peck, his encounter with Burton became an unforgettable ordeal. Their first meeting took place at a lavish Beverly Hills party. Burton entered with a glass of scotch in hand, his deep theatrical voice booming across the room as if he were performing Shakespeare rather than socializing. When someone introduced Gregory Peck as the man who gave cinema Atticus Finch, Burton burst into drunken laughter and declared loudly to everyone around him, "Gregory Peck isn't an actor. He's a human rights speech wrapped in an expensive suit." The room erupted in laughter at Burton's brazen arrogance, but he wasn't finished. At party after party, Burton continued his mockery, referring to Peck as St. Gregory, or the man who pretends to live virtuously. Even in interviews, Burton couldn't resist taking jabs at him, scoffing, "Peck acts as if he's delivering a speech at the United Nations." Then, in 1965, when Richard Burton was at the height of his fame, a new film project surfaced. The producers wanted both Burton and Peck to star together. The script was sent to Gregory Peck first, and that was when history nearly repeated itself. Gregory Peck read only a few pages of the script before tossing it onto the table and saying coldly, "I can work with anyone except an arrogant fool like him." Within 48 hours, the project was canceled. Peck's professionalism and impeccable reputation had ended any possibility of collaboration, dealing a heavy blow to Richard Burton's pride. Later in an interview with a British journalist, Burton confessed that he hated Gregory Peck to his core, not for who he was, but for what he represented. "Peck's reputation," Burton sneered, "is the greatest lie Hollywood ever agreed to believe." Burton made no attempt to hide his flaws. He drank heavily, indulged in scandalous affairs, and often lost his temper. To him, that was the truth of art and life. Peck, on the other hand, seemed to live untouched by any of it. Calm, disciplined, almost saintly. Burton viewed that perfection as an unbearable deception, something that mocked his own chaos. "Every time I see his face, I want to vomit," Burton once said. "He's my conscience, the shame I always try to deny. He proves that a man can live without madness, without alcohol, without sin, and that drives me insane. I hate what he forces me to see about myself." When Richard Burton died in 1984, newspapers around the world reprinted that infamous quote as a symbol of arrogance. The next day, a reporter approached Gregory Peck, asking if he had anything to say about Burton's death. Peck looked into the distance for a moment and replied quietly, "A man like Burton doesn't need me to say anything more." If Frank Sinatra had tested Peck's patience and Burton had wounded his pride, the next man would challenge everything he believed in. John Wayne, the other half of America's divided soul. John Wayne and Gregory Peck hated each other deeply. Wayne, the rugged symbol of patriotism, openly supported the Vietnam War, while Peck signed petitions against it and advocated for civil rights. To Wayne, Peck was a moralizing weakling. To Peck, Wayne was the face of blind aggression. Their simmering resentment finally erupted at a Hollywood party in 1971. Wearing a leather shirt, Wayne stood before a crowd of producers and actors, raised his glass, and growled, "If America were full of men like Gregory Peck, we'd have lost before the first shot was fired." Laughter filled the room, but it faded quickly when Peck, sitting at a distant table, calmly stood up and replied, "And if America were full of men like you, we'd never know what peace is." From that night on, their conflict became public. Both refused to appear at any event where the other was present. When the American Film Institute invited them to participate in a panel on heroes in American cinema, Peck flatly declined, saying, "I don't want to share fame with him." But fate wasn't done with them yet. In 1970, Universal Studios proposed a sequel to True Grit, Rooster Cogburn, with John Wayne and Gregory Peck as co-stars. The contract was almost finalized until Wayne saw Peck's name, slammed the script on the table, and roared, "I won't act with that America hater." Peck's response was equally firm and cold. Two men, two legends, and two opposing visions of what America truly was. Forever divided by pride, conviction, and the ideals they refused to surrender. Gregory Peck looked the director in the eye and said firmly, "I'd rather die." The tension between him and John Wayne had reached its breaking point. As the years went on, their divide only deepened. Wayne became increasingly active in far-right political movements, while Peck spoke before Congress about peace and civil rights. For 2 decades, the two men refused even the smallest gesture of civility. When they crossed paths in the hallways of the Academy Awards, Wayne would turn his face away while Peck would stop, straighten his tie, and walk past in silence, a subtle but unmistakable act of contempt. In Wayne's final years, as he battled cancer, a reporter asked Peck if he planned to visit him. Peck paused, his expression unreadable, and replied, "I pray for his soul, but I still can't bear to look at his face." When John Wayne died in 1979, Hollywood's flags flew at half-mast. Hundreds of stars sent flowers and tributes poured in from around the world. Gregory Peck, however, did not attend the funeral. Instead, he sent a single letter to the Wayne family containing only 2 words, "My condolences." But after Wayne, another man would test Peck's composure, this time in a completely different way, not through arrogance or politics, but through maddening eccentricity. His name was Orson Welles, the brilliant lunatic who never stopped talking. Welles was one of Hollywood's few true geniuses, but also the only man who could push the famously calm Gregory Peck to the edge of losing control. From the very first day of shooting Moby Dick, the atmosphere on set was suffocating. Peck, as usual, arrived on time, prepared for his haunting role as Captain Ahab. But 2 hours later, there was still no sign of Welles, who was playing Father Mapple. Then, out of nowhere, he appeared, surrounded by a haze of cigarette smoke and the lingering smell of wine. When director John Huston reprimanded him for being late, Welles merely smirked, draped an arm around Peck's shoulder, and said mockingly, "Come on, boys, let's not be so serious." Peck frowned and quietly brushed his arm away. Welles's disregard for discipline and respect had already crossed his line. Things quickly went downhill. Welles began interfering with the production, rewriting dialogue, suggesting new camera angles, even contradicting Huston's direction in front of the crew. During one scene of Ahab's prayer, Welles interrupted, muttering like a madman, "Ahab is crazy because of God." When filming the shipboard sermon, Welles ignored the script entirely, delivering his lines in a deep, manic voice that was hypnotic but unrecognizable. Peck, standing just outside the frame, watched as Welles performed like a man possessed. When Huston finally shouted, "Cut!" Welles didn't stop. He turned directly to Peck and said, "You see that? That's madness. You'll never understand, Gregory. You don't understand anything." Peck stood frozen, his jaw clenched, every muscle tight with fury. The thought flickered through his mind like lightning. God forgive me for not punching him. Welles didn't even seem to hear him. He tilted his head back, gazing toward the sky with a faint, manic grin. "He doesn't know what madness is," Welles muttered. "What a pitiful little man." From that day forward, Gregory Peck kept his distance. Welles, on the other hand, bragged that his own performance had saved the entire film. Years later, when asked about Welles in an interview, Peck's tone turned cold. "How should I put it?" he said after a pause. "He was like a man who'd fallen from the heavens." Decades later, Orson Welles would retell the story to a group of students, laughing as though it were nothing. "Gregory Peck's a good man," he said, smirking, "but he lacks spice. I only meant to shake him up a little." After Moby Dick, Peck never again worked with anyone quite like Welles. He steered clear of artistic egos and eccentric temperaments, choosing instead roles that reflected morality, discipline, and purpose. That encounter with Welles left him with a bitter lesson: that genius often comes unaccompanied by integrity. Yet, for all the fiery, arrogant men he had crossed paths with, the one who truly unsettled him never raised his voice, nor threw an insult. He didn't need to. His mere existence was enough to make Peck feel diminished. A man possessed by an almost pathological need to outshine him, Kirk Douglas. For nearly 20 years, Peck and Douglas waged a quiet war. Polite on the surface, venomous underneath. By the late 1940s, Peck was already an established A-lister, the face of Hollywood virtue. Douglas, newly famous after Champion, despised everything that image represented. He often sneered, "Gregory just stands there and lets his morality do the acting." In interviews, Douglas never missed a chance to take a jab. When asked about the difference between them, he grinned and said, "Gregory Peck is as stiff as a board, and that's why I'll always be better." The quote spread quickly, fanning the flames between them. Their rivalry reached its peak in 1963 when Gregory Peck won the Oscar for To Kill a Mockingbird, immortalizing him as Atticus Finch, the very embodiment of moral courage. As the audience rose to applaud, Kirk Douglas sat in the back row, drink in hand, and muttered loud enough for those nearby to hear. If he were really Atticus Finch, Hollywood wouldn't be drowning in hypocrisy. Peck heard him. He turned, gave Douglas a brief, distant glance, and said nothing. Later, when a journalist asked about Douglas's comment, Peck simply replied, "He just loves to put on a show." Douglas went on to chase raw, defiant roles, Paths of Glory, Spartacus, the kind of films that bared their teeth. Peck, meanwhile, remained the calm center of Hollywood's conscience. Two men, two different worlds, both brilliant, both proud, and both forever haunted by the reflection they saw in each other. Over the years, that unspoken rivalry began to consume Kirk Douglas. It hardened him, made him louder, quicker to anger, desperate to prove something that no one had asked him to. He became everything Gregory Peck was not: fiery, competitive, and alone. While Peck stood as Hollywood's image of integrity, Douglas earned a different title: the Old Wolf, forever hungry for recognition. When Columbia Pictures invited both men to star in The Heroes of Telemark in 1960, director Ray Bolting recalled that Peck refused almost immediately. "I don't want to share the screen with a man who acts only with his chin and is shouting," he said quietly. Douglas heard the remark and exploded. He called Peck the hypocrite with a golden halo, sneering that Gregory was nothing more than a product of studio polish, a saint painted by publicists. From then on, there was no reconciliation possible. They became the two poles of old Hollywood: intellect versus instinct, discipline versus desire, silence versus noise. Their feud lasted for decades through awards, aging, and changing times. In an interview during the 1980s, when asked who he believed to be the last true star of the Golden Age, Douglas replied with pride, "Gregory Peck may be a star, but I'm a man, and I'd rather be real than a statue built on lies." Peck never answered. He only smiled faintly and said nothing. To those who asked, he once remarked, "Some people spend their whole lives proving they're not beneath anyone and forget that no one's watching anymore." Years later, time softened them both. In 2001, after Kirk Douglas suffered a stroke, a reporter asked him about his long feud with Peck. Tears welled in his eyes. "Greg was the man I resented, envied, and in the end, wished I could be." When Peck heard of Douglas's condition, he simply said, "I don't hate him anymore. I just wish we had understood each other." Their story became more than just a Hollywood rivalry. It was the quiet tragedy of two men who fought for meaning in a world that rewarded illusion. Peck believed truth was found in restraint. Douglas believed truth had to be shouted, but in the end, both were remembered not for who won, but for how deeply they were bound. Two souls burning in the same unforgiving light. Because Hollywood, beneath its golden shimmer, is not a dream factory at all. It is a theater built on illusion. Beneath the sparkle lies the machinery of falsehood. Faith is staged. Smiles are rehearsed. Emotions have expiration dates written in contracts. Passion is marketed. Pain is edited in post-production. And love is filtered until it can be sold. Fame becomes currency. Bodies, instruments, loneliness, an unpayable debt. Every frame is calculated, every tear measured, every kiss precisely lit. Even truth must be trimmed to fit the schedule. The light that once revealed the soul now blinds it, selling beauty while consuming the spirit behind it. Behind the velvet curtains lie the ghosts of those who once believed the spotlight could save them. But it never saved anyone. The light was not redemption, it was fire. And in that fire, the weak burned silently while the strong learned to smile through the smoke. Because in Hollywood, even pain must look beautiful. They still call it the American dream. But if you stand there long enough, past the applause, beyond the flashes, you might hear something else. Something faint, raw, and achingly human. The sigh of those who once believed in the light before realizing that the light never belonged to them.